Yes, I'm fooling with my hair because I never know how I look when I come on. And I never know how that wave is going to be in my hair. Some reason I have waves I never had when I was younger. Okay, so what am I talking about today? Well, a lot of different things. Let me just jump right on in. Okay. This was one that I came across because of, you guessed it, that troll. So we're just going to jump right on in. I'm Suzanne Titkemeyer. I used to write for a company called Pathos for nearly 10 years, a column called No Longer Quivering that had to do with the quiverful movement, about evangelical Christianity, and any number of really crazy things. So this is a topic that I had to deal with both in my church and with outside my church that my religion actually impacted. So I want to talk about how badly I failed at this, because I did fail at it when we were doing the quiverful movement stuff. And watching what happened last night was pretty interesting. Okay, before I start, don't bully anybody I talk about. Don't be rude, don't be nasty, and do all the YouTubey things if you would. Hit like, subscribe, hit the notification bell so that you're notified when I'm on here, which I like to come in on Sunday mornings. I always have something I'm thinking about, always on Sundays. And it doesn't have a thing to do with oh, what do you call it? With theology most of the time. But a lot of times it's something that I dealt with in my old Fundy town life that was not good. Grief, death, and all of that was not good in those days. I'm about to explain why. Um, Back to what happened last night. Last night, right before I went to bed, and I took a mental health holiday yesterday. I didn't go online hardly at all. I went on a few times to answer people. I didn't go online. I didn't go on here because I had somebody that was seriously harshing my mellow. They were making me crazy because they were making all these claims that I kept asking them about the claims, and they kept saying, "You're doing this, you're doing this." And it's like, well, how am I doing this? They couldn't explain how I was doing. Hey, Kentucky girl, how I was impacting their dollar bottom line, because they said I was impacting the amount of money they were making. But they only had 33 subscribers. They were a real small YouTuber once I looked at it. So it was like, I know you don't have Google AdSense, so how am I impacting you in that way? How am I harming your financial bottom line? She couldn't tell me, but she kept just coming back and back. So finally I just said block, and I'm going away for the day. And I did. And it was a good thing. Okay, so this has nothing to do with that, except that I will say that this was some of the whole MarVon McRae conspiracy theory thing. Late last night when I came back on, hey, Mom of the Monsters, late night when I came back on, we had that troll ending her life early because the husband came in the room and he said to her, "Vaughn wants to talk to you. It's bedtime." And she kind of pushed him off, if I remember right, or acted like she wasn't coming. And he said something about he wants to know about life expectancy. Hey, Karma Kid. Okay. I just want to throw this out there. As much as I think that troll is a horrible mother on so many levels, this is not something to throw rocks at her over. We all deal with these horrible, well, not horrible, normal, weird questions from our kids. God knows I did. I dealt with them too. And how I dealt with them varied widely depending upon whether or not I was drinking the Kool-Aid or not. When I was drinking the Kool-Aid, my belief and thoughts on death was, it's all good, Jesus. Either I'm coming up or I'm staying here, and I'm fine with both. I'm a little bit different on that now. And I went through some really horrible, horrible times in where I had to talk to my kids about these things, one of which was 9/11. 9/11 happened. My youngest was 10. My middle child was 13. And there were some serious questions that happened about death and various things about death for weeks and months afterwards. Before that, it was the insanity of Y2K. My old church treated Y2K like it was the end of the world, and I just never believed that. People would ask me, "What are you going to stockpile for Y2K?" It's like, not a damn thing. I might have a few dollars in cash extra on me, but I'm not filling up my car. I'm not buying a generator. I'm not buying 10 cases of toilet paper like everybody else, because I know enough about computers to know that even if the computer as systems thought it was 1900 again, it wasn't going to impact the world like they were saying. It just was not. Maybe in some remote places. But that was the first time that I had the idea that what other people say around your children can really seriously mess them up in here. And they end up with these weird questions about these things. I tell this tale in my book. I'm going to tell it here. The day of Y2K, like I said, we did not participate in any of that Y2K fear mongering at all. And we got away from it. What was going on in our church. So basically, what we ended up doing was my daughter got very, very, very upset on the morning of New Year's Eve in Virginia, where we lived. And she was crying and carrying on. It was like 10 o'clock in the morning. And I said, "Well, why are you so upset?" "Oh, hey, back on my books. Hey. And she said, "Because the world is about to end. The world is about to end. The world is ending. I don't want the world to end. I'm frightened." And this would have been, she'd have been about 8 years old, I think, at the time, 7 or 8. And I went, huh? Because, like I said, we never participated in any of that fear mongering. But apparently, the fear mongering that went on in our old church was strong enough where that really implanted that in her mind that Y2K was coming, that New Year's Eve was the end of the world. I sat down and talked to her about it for a long time, about her feelings and why she thought that and the whole 9 yards. And at the end, what I ended up doing was I said, "Look, let's take a look. Let's take a look at what's going on right now." So I turned on the television set to one of the news channels and showed her that the new year had already come in China and places well east of us, and that everything was fine. People were shooting off their fireworks and doing their thing. And nobody, and I mean nobody, was having this horrible thing that her friends at church had been saying. So there was that. So I just want to tell you, one of the things I did this morning was I went and I started looking at a lot of websites about how do you talk to your children about death and these other weird, squishy things. Because let's face it, it is going to be hard. It's going to be a real hard thing for you to do if you're caught unprepared and you don't know what you're going to say. And with 9/11, it was a little bit different because the questions I got were harder and more difficult to answer. And both of my children had already seen the media coverage by the time they got home from school. Fortunately for me, my daughter's teacher decided to have everybody do art to express their feelings. And some of the art I saw was surprising and scary from that day. So I started doing some reading on this. And everything I saw said that how difficult it is to talk to your child, and that you worry you might frighten them or say the wrong thing. But here's the thing, you really need to be open and honest with them about all of that. You need to come up with, I'm going to say, age appropriate ways to deal with whatever they're going on. Like I said, my daughter was freaking out over the Y2K, and I was able to show her after I talked to her and said, your feelings are valid. I'm sorry you feel that way. And let's look at the reality of this thing. One of my kids' classmates was in a school shooting. No matter how to talk, no idea how to talk to him about it. He's 9. Back in my books, all I can say is that would be a tough one. I haven't seen any websites yet where anybody is talking about how to talk to your kids about mass shootings. But I suspect it's coming. I'm going to do some research and I'm going to put some links in here. One of the ones I found that I was really taken with was a Marie Curie organization out of the UK. They had some really good suggestions, like this one. When they ask a question, you could start by asking, well, what do you think? Then you can build your answer on their understanding about what's happening. And I think that's a valid way to do it. You start with what the child believes is happening. Because like I said, with the Y2K thing, what she thought was happening was not valid. And I had to show her that it was not valid. She wasn't going to just believe her poor mom. Try to avoid telling the child not to worry or to be sad. It's normal. They should get attached to people. So they may find it hard to control their feelings. You might find the child doesn't seem to be sad. Sometimes they need time to process what's happening. Normal. Don't try to hide your pain. Yep, you don't. You have to be very honest about that, very honest and open about what you yourself are going through about all of this, because it's not easy on us as adults either. We don't know. I've talked about this in my book in extreme detail. 9/11 was a horrible day for me. Recently, I had somebody pull the, well, you don't know what you're talking about terrorism thing on me. And I had to say, oh, yes, I do, because 9/11, and we were living in the DC burbs. My husband had a hard time getting home from work that day. I didn't know if he was going to live or die because he was working on his building abuts Capitol Hill. We were told that a plane was on its way to the Capitol. It was a very bad day. And we did lose people. We lost some people right in our town to the plane that hit the Pentagon. So anybody who was involved with that day in the media environs of New York and the DC area would have been affected, would have been impacted. That's a good idea. I might see if he wants to talk about it again. I don't think I handled it great. Back on my books, it's hard to know how to handle this stuff. This is why I'm talking about this, because I don't think I handled, there were some things that I mishandled when my kids were little. I think the biggest one that I can think of was right before Y2K, my father died. My father died that November 1999. And I was still drinking the Kool-Aid hard, probably the hardest right then that I ever had. And one of the things that I did was I did not bring my kids with me down to Louisiana to say goodbye to their grandfather. I just acted like they needed to be no part of it at all. I told them, think happy thoughts about your grandpa. And I said a lot of really stupid things that I've had to go back and apologize for now. I left them with friends. Well, first of all, I didn't know what I was going to find. And I have my large Cajun family that's kind of semi-nuts. So I didn't know what I was going to find when I got there. All I knew is he was on life support because he was brain dead. But I didn't even know he was brain dead until I got down there. And I didn't want to put my kids through that. I didn't want to put them through the hell that I knew dealing with my family was going to be. But looking back, I should have just packed the kids and taken them with us. As horrible as it all was, that was their grandfather. And I deprived them of the opportunity to say goodbye to him. I had plenty of opportunity to say goodbye to him because I was there. But they did not. They never got that opportunity because of my decisions that day. Okay, let me go back to this list. Be sure to give the child plenty of reassurance. Let them know they're loved and there are still people who will be there for them. Yep. There's also links. There is child bereavement that gives a lot of detail on what you can do. But they said the most important thing is be honest, plain language, and encourage them to ask questions. Hey, Prairie, I'm talking about a really hard subject today that sprung out of something that happened with that troll and her husband last night, saying the child wanted to talk about life expectancy. And why would he have wanted to talk about life expectancy? Likely because he heard his mother running her mouth about the other Vaughn and life expectancy to do with brain death and various things. And it probably zinged some questions in him because of his own health issues, which would be normal. And it's normal to have fear about those things too. I was talking about this earlier on Facebook, not Facebook, excuse me, Twitter. When my child was 4, when my baby was 4, and she had ITP, one of the nurses said something about they thought she was asleep. They said something to me about her chances of survival were low because her platelets were that low, and she had meningitis on top of that. So they were prepared. They said a few things to me about they didn't think she was going to make it. And I know she must have overheard that, because afterwards, after the whole nonsense of what we went through in the hospital, and it was almost a month between the time she arrived and left. She left once and we had to take her right back. She went back into all kinds of problems. So long story short, it was a long traumatic experience for both of us. Afterwards, anytime she would get anything, and I mean a cough, a cut, little minor things that you and I deal with every day, she would start freaking out and crying, going, I'm going to die, I'm going to die, I'm going to die. That nurse had really done a number on her by the time she said all of that. And I didn't even know she'd overheard that conversation. So for many years afterwards, I had to say, it's okay, it's okay. You're going to be all right. This is not life-threatening. Thanks, back on my books. It was terrifying. It was terrifying, terrifying. And then for her to have this additional terror that she carried out, that any little bump, bruise, or cut was going to kill her was horrific. So I found myself having to calm her down and going, it's okay, it's okay. So many times, even over serious things, because I did not want that poor child to suffer. And let's face it, our own mental cruelty, inward cruelty to ourselves, is going to cause us to suffer many times. So I just finally had to sit down and talk to her about it. I would talk to her on a really regular basis about this because she would get so frightened over so many things. And it wasn't a rational fear, but it was in there. And I had to sit down and ask her questions about why she felt that way and what happened and all of that. Okay, it says here that children can ask the same questions over and over again. It can be distressing. It says, but it's part of the need for reassurance and helps them process everything, leading in to reassure them. And see, that's the weird thing for me about childhood. Hey, Queen of Sheba, is that a lot of times, how is this? I just was too cold and now I'm too hot. And I've already gone through menopause, so I can't even blame it on that. The thing is, I was going to say, is children blame themselves for all of this. And it's really silly. I mean, we as adults, we can rationally look at that and say, no, you didn't cause your grandmother to die because you forgot to eat your vegetables or you didn't pray or whatever. But this is the kind of mindset a child has. A child has the mindset that they caused all of that. And I had to deal with that coming out of the fundy town with my children, believing that they caused all these things. And it was hard to deal with. But basically, I dealt with it by doing the same thing they're saying here. I ask questions. I would say, why do you feel this way? Why do you think that? Children also blame themselves for abuse. Absolutely, they blame themselves for abuse. They blame themselves for neglect too. And they always make an excuse for that parent. And even if they're removed from that abusive, neglectful parent, hey, Jan, they immediately make excuses and they want that parent. That's what's really mind-boggling. That's how deep that is. It's best to give honest answers to children in a language they can understand and list their fears and issues, in my humble opinion. Queen of Sheba, that's exactly what everything I've been reading says. And that's the best thing you can do. I think the worst thing you can do is say, let's not talk about that. Let's not talk about that. That doesn't affect you. Trauma bond. Yep, the trauma bond, trauma bonding. I saw that really hot all of a sudden. I saw that really hard in the residential treatment center I work for. So many kids, I knew they came out of this horrible abuse. One child, his mother and the boyfriend locked him in the basement and would torture him with lit cigarettes and things, but he still wanted his mother. He still wanted his abusive mother. Another one, the mother sold her and the child corn, and she still wanted her mother. Unfortunately, I also married abuse. Jan, I'm so sorry. It does happen. And here's the thing, those of us that may not be coming from these abusive backgrounds, we may not recognize it until it's too late. I've often told the story of my first awful short marriage. There was a lot of abuse that went on there. There was a lot of really squishy, horrible, bad things, right down to the fact that he left me in labor at the hospital to go out and get drunk with his friends. Was Vaughn asking about his life expectancy or his mother's? Java Man, I'm not really sure because Todd said he's asking about life expectancy. He didn't say he's asking about your life expectancy or his life expectancy, but that he was asking about life expectancy. You know, she says that he watches all of her videos religiously, and that is really very it kind of sickens me on a lot of levels. First of all, this is a child that does not have enough of a bond with his mother, that the only mother he has is his electronic mother, watching his mother on his devices. It's probably the only time he gets to see her. You're right, Java Man. I believe that because the topics she covers don't have a damn thing to do with anything that would interest a 9-year-old boy or a 10-year-old boy, however old he is now. And they're not appropriate. She says a lot of things that are not appropriate. My husband died in 2001 and my son was 3. I was in shock, waited 24 hours to get my shit together, prayed as I had no support. Oh, silly rabbit. I'm so sorry because it is traumatic. It's so traumatizing. Young some bikes, leaving someone in labor is messed up. Yep, that's my ex-husband. Probably the only time he gets to see her, absolutely, other than when they were sleeping together. And I can't even really throw shade over that because we always practiced family bed for a long, long time. When we had toddlers and babies, they slept with us. And we moved them to beds when they were a little older. And no child should be privy to adult issues discussed by that troll. Absolutely, Prairie. Absolutely. No one young should ever be exposed to that, I think. And that's the thing with all of these really hard issues, you really need to talk in language a child will understand. And you don't need to give too many details. You don't want to go over the top and go into extreme detail, but you want to acknowledge their feelings and give them an outlook to talk about it. My tiniest one usually ends up in my bed at some point in the night or very early in the morning. Prairie, I think that's why we started doing it, because of that. And because I was breastfeeding, and it was just easier when you're breastfeeding, have the baby right there with you. Some people continue breastfeeding after the age of 6. Java Man, I got a horrible confession to make. Not me, but my father was breastfed until the age of 10. I breastfed both of my son and daughters till they were 2. And my father used to give me crap about it. I'd say, what about you? You got breastfed till you were 10. That's ridiculous. Kids can't deal with adult issues, and we adults should not push too much on them too soon. Queen of Sheba, that's exactly right. Saying the dead person is sleeping makes kids fearful. Exactly. Death and sleeping are very different, and kids know. Yes, they do know. And even littlest ones are not too young to know that death is a natural part of life, and that it's not so much to be feared, it's just another stage of life. And they could understand that in a very sort of basic way. You don't want to give them too much detail on any of that. But like I said, I selfishly cut my children completely out of the grieving process when my father died. And it was awful because my father was the grandfather who sent them stuff all the time, that took them out and treated them to everything in the world you could think of, to the point where he had already bought them bicycles for Christmas when he passed. We had to go pick them up. It was it was kind of heartbreaking, and kind of a heartbreaking day. And my kids did see me grieve over him and cry many times. That year for Thanksgiving and Christmas, I just was not myself in any way, shape, or form. My father was my two parents, my father was the one that I really grieved. He was the one that was there for me all the time. So tiniest humans got 3 months worth of boob juice. Yep, by cold weather season, I had to go back on my lyrica because otherwise I wouldn't be able to lift her in and out of her bath now. Prairie. By the way, my pediatrician gave me the best advice and told me not to force my son to talk about it, to let him bring it to you. I really listened to his advice, best advice ever. Silly rabbit, I can relate to that. I talk about that in my book too. When we got to the scary, gross, sticky sex years, where I'm going to talk about, I've talked about my missteps as a parent in the church with my kids about sex, because I was doing the modesty culture, purity cultural thing, but not quite as hard as many of my parishioners were. So when my daughter brought home a book called Are You Dateable from Justin Lookadoo, I was pretty horrified because it pushed the whole idea of strict gender roles. Girls are soft, girls are sweet, girls talk with a sweet little voice. She was a month preemie, so I started pumping while still in the recovery room after my C-section. That is smart, great. That is smart, Prairie. Hey, Grace, Peter. So I mishandled all of that with them when they got to that age. And my daughter, I kept talking to her. I kept asking her a zillion trillion questions. Prairie, the name of the book was R is the letter R, U is the letter U, Dateable by Justin Lookadoo. It's still sold, the silly thing. And it's all about these Christian gender roles. Now, he doesn't ever say don't date anybody, but that's what my daughter took away from it. Don't date, don't have crushes, don't do that until you're ready to get married. And then you go to courtship. So our old church also taught the book by Harass. And I'm having a brain fart, a senior moment. Yes, lots of looking into great support groups for children. There's a big, you're lucky that you were able to get one right away. Yeah, silly rabbit. That's probably the best thing you could do, a grief support group for him. I cannot imagine having a child that was part of a mass shooting. That would be horrible. Josh Harris, I kissed dating goodbye. I know he has denounced that ideology. He has he did a lot of good things, but I'm going to say one thing. One thing he did not do that was good was after it was all over and the dust is shaken out, he tried to put together this quite expensive program of recovery from